The dust of Dust Creek wasn't just dirt. It was a shroud. It covered everything, especially Joanne Miller, a woman known only by the shame of her father's name. When Wyatt Boone, the heir to the largest cattle empire in the territory, vanished, the town sent armed search parties. But when his horse returned empty, Joanne saw what they missed. With her boots split and useless, she did the only thing she could. She wrapped her feet in rags and began to walk. This is the story of that walk, and the promise that waited at the end of it. The town of Dust Creek, Arizona, was built on 3 things: cattle, silver, and unforgiving judgment. No one knew that judgment better than Joanne Miller. She lived in a ramshackle lean-to on the edge of the territory, just beyond the last surveyor's stake, and well past the boundary of polite society. Her father had been a gambler, a cheat who had lost everything, including the town's respect, before a bullet finally settled his debts. He left Joanne nothing but his name, which was its own kind of currency, one that only bought whispers and scorn. She survived by selling crude, hand-carved trinkets and mending clothes for the few prospectors too poor or too drunk to care about her lineage. She was 19, with eyes that had seen too much hardship, and hands that were cracked and calloused. The other women of the town, in their starched cotton dresses, would pull their children close when she walked by, as if poverty were a sickness she might spread. Then there was Wyatt Boone. Wyatt was the opposite of everything Joanne represented. He was the golden son of Jeremiah Boone, a man who measured his wealth in horizons. The Circle B ranch wasn't just land, it was a kingdom, and Wyatt was its prince. But where his father was iron and calculation, Wyatt was tempered steel and quiet kindness. He was the only person in Dust Creek who ever looked Joanne in the eye. She remembered the day, a month prior, when he'd ridden up to her poultry stall near the livery. The other ranchers ignored her. Wyatt had reined in his tall bay horse, tipped his hat, and surveyed her carvings, a small, rough wooden bird. "That's fine work, miss," he'd said, his voice deep and clear. She'd flinched, unused to direct address. "It's nothing, just scrap wood." "It's something," he insisted. He'd pulled a silver dollar from his vest. "I'll take it." "It's not worth $1, sir. It's a dime." Wyatt had pressed the coin into her hand, his fingers warm for a brief second against her rough palm. "The price is what the buyer is willing to pay." He'd smiled, a genuine expression that didn't hold the pity or contempt she usually saw. "You have a good day, Joanne." He knew her name. He hadn't called her Miller's girl. He'd called her Joanne. That silver dollar remained hidden in a loose brick in her hearth, a token of a kindness so rare it felt like a dream. The only other person from the Circle B who paid her any mind was Landon Hobbs. Hobbs was Jeremiah Boone's foreman, a man with a hawk's nose and restless, ambitious eyes. Hobbs saw everything in terms of leverage. He saw Joanne's poverty not as a tragedy, but as a weakness to be filed away. He'd often watch her from across the street, a look of calculating assessment on his face that made her skin crawl. He despised her for being a loose thread in the tidy fabric of Dust Creek, and he despised Wyatt for showing her even a hint of decency. Hobbs believed kindness was a form of weakness, and weakness was something he intended to exploit. One Tuesday, a wind kicked up from the south, carrying the metallic taste of an oncoming storm. Joanne was securing the canvas flap over her window when she saw Wyatt Boone and Landon Hobbs ride out of town. They were arguing. She couldn't hear the words, but the set of Wyatt's shoulders was rigid, and Hobbs was gesturing angrily toward the high country, toward the dangerous maze of canyons known as Badger's Pass. Wyatt had shaken his head, then spurred his horse, riding hard toward the pass alone. Hobbs had watched him go, a strange, dark look on his face, before turning his own horse back toward the main ranch. It was the last time anyone saw Wyatt Boone. The storm broke that night with the fury of a vengeful god. Rain fell in solid, blinding sheets, turning the hard-baked streets of Dust Creek into a river of mud. Thunder cracked overhead, sounding like the mountains themselves were splitting apart. Joanne huddled in her shack, listening to the wind tear at her roof, the lone silver dollar heavy in her pocket. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a scrubbed, weeping sky and a world drowned in mud. The news spread through town faster than the flash flood. Wyatt Boone hadn't returned. Jeremiah Boone, his face a mask of granite, organized the search. He posted a $500 reward. Every able-bodied man, from ranch hands to saloon gamblers, grabbed a rifle and joined the posse. Landon Hobbs, his face a picture of grim concern, took charge. "He was checking the line cabins in Badger's Pass," Hobbs shouted over the din. "He must have been caught in a flash flood. We ride north." The main posse, 20 men strong, thundered out of town, heading for the main opening of the pass. From her shack, Joanne watched them go. Something felt wrong. The mud was a mess, but her life had taught her to read the ground. She walked to where she'd seen Wyatt ride out. The posse had obliterated most of the tracks, but one set, near the creek bed, told a different story. Wyatt wasn't heading for the main pass. He'd been heading southeast toward the Devil's Throat, a narrow, treacherous canyon system the posse was deliberately avoiding. She remembered something he'd said to the blacksmith last week, something she'd overheard while waiting for scraps. "My father thinks the old Sanguine claim is dead," Wyatt had said, "but I found an old map. I think there's a spring up there. Going to check it myself one of these days." The Sanguine claim was deep in the Devil's Throat. As if summoned by her thoughts, a lone horse limped into view from that very direction. It was Wyatt's bay, Tempest. The saddle was empty. Its left flank was scraped raw, and a dark, bloody stain marked the leather of the saddle. But it wasn't mud, and it wasn't just blood from a scrape. It looked like a bullet graze along the cantle. The horse avoided the posse and trotted, exhausted, toward the Boone Ranch. No one else had seen it. Joanne knew. He was in the Devil's Throat, and the posse was riding in the wrong direction. She ran to the edge of town, waving her arms as the last few riders followed the main group. "Wait!" she cried. "He went south, toward the Sanguine." One of the riders, a Circle B hand named Pete, sneered at her. "Get back to your shack, Miller." Hobbs gave the orders. "He knows the land." "But the horse!" she yelled. "His horse came from the south. He's hurt." Landon Hobbs himself rode back, his face thunderous. "Are you telling me how to do my job, girl?" he snarled. "You'll send us on a fool's errand. Jeremiah Boone is offering $500 for his son, not for your worthless opinion. Get out of the way." He spurred his horse, showering her in mud. She was dismissed, humiliated. But she knew. That blood wasn't from a fall. The scrape on the horse looked like it had scrambled away from a rock slide, or gunfire. She looked at the canyon, then down at her own feet. The storm had finished what months of walking had started. Her only boots, thin and patched, had split open in the mud. The soles were flapping. They wouldn't last a mile. She ran back to her shack, her heart pounding with a cold, terrible certainty. Hobbs was lying. He was deliberately sending the search party the wrong way. Wyatt was alone, hurt, and running out of time. She tore 2 long strips from her only spare blanket. She sat on her cot, pulled off the ruined boots, and carefully, tightly, wrapped the thick wool around her bare feet. It was a pathetic armor. It wouldn't be enough. She didn't care. She grabbed a small canteen, a heel of stale bread, and the small wooden bird Wyatt had bought. She tucked it into her pocket. Then Joanne Miller stepped out of her shack and began to walk, barefoot through the mud and dust, toward the Devil's Throat. The mud of the flats was the first test. It was thick and cold, sucking at the rags on her feet, trying to pull them off with every step. It caked her ankles and calves, heavy and cold. But the mud was a mercy. It was soft. After an hour, the mud gave way to the shale and scree of the canyon's entrance. This was the Devil's Throat. The landscape was a broken, angry red. The storm had washed away the soft sand, leaving a path of jagged rocks, knife-edged slate, and the thorny skeletons of cholla cactus. With every step, a new pain. A sharp rock sliced the rag and her heel. A thorn embedded itself in her arch. She cried out, a small, thin sound that the canyon walls swallowed instantly. She stopped, perched on one leg like a wounded crane, and pulled the thorn free, watching a bead of bright red blood well up. She thought of turning back. Who was she to do this? She was Joanne Miller, the gambler's girl. She was nothing. If the posse found her out here, they'd laugh. If they found her dead, they'd shrug. Then she thought of his smile. The price is what the buyer is willing to pay. She gritted her teeth and kept walking. The sun rose higher, baking the wet rock into a skillet. The moisture evaporated, and the dust returned. It was a fine, alkaline dust that got into the cuts on her feet, burning like acid. The rags were in tatters, offering no protection. She was truly barefoot now, walking on raw, bleeding feet. She followed the subtle tracks, a scuffed rock, a broken branch, the faint, nearly invisible print of a horseshoe that Tempest had left behind. She pushed past the pain, her mind detaching from her body. It became a rhythm. Step, wince, breathe. Step, gasp, breathe. She found the first sign of him after 4 hours. It was a patch of ground, sheltered by an overhang. The earth was torn up, and there was a dark, terrifying stain of dried blood. Near it, she found a spent shell casing, a Winchester. Not a fall, not a flood. He had been shot. Panic, cold and sharp, gave her a new, frantic energy. She moved faster, scrambling over boulders, ignoring the sharp pains as she tore her hands and knees. She followed the trail of his desperate crawl. He had been dragging himself. She found him late in the afternoon, nearly a full day after he'd gone missing. He was at the end of a box canyon, slumped against a rock face, near the tiny, muddy seep he must have been searching for. The sanguine spring. "Wyatt," she whispered. He was pale as death. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone clearly shattered. But that wasn't the worst of it. A dark, ugly wound high on his shoulder was seeping blood, a crude bandage tied around it. He was delirious, his lips cracked and white. She rushed forward, collapsing beside him, her own feet a mask of blood and dirt. "Wyatt, it's Joanne! I'm here!" He stirred, his eyes barely focusing. "Joanne!" he mumbled. He was burning with fever. "I'm here. I'm here." She put her canteen to his lips, and he drank greedily. She looked at the wound. The bandage was his own neckerchief, and it wasn't enough. The infection was already setting in. She couldn't move him. The posse was miles away, going in the wrong direction. If she left him to get help, he'd be dead from the fever or blood loss before she was halfway back to town. She had to save him. Here. She looked at her bleeding feet, then at his dying face. "You're not dying here, Wyatt Boone," she whispered, her voice rough with a protective fury she didn't know she possessed. She limped to the seep, washing the filth from her hands. She tore strips from her own skirt, the only clean cloth she had. She remembered the things her father, in his rare, sober moments, had taught her about the land. She recognized the pale green leaves of the feverfew plant growing near the water, and the yarrow nearby. She gathered the leaves, crushed them between two rocks into a crude poultice, and returned to him. "This is going to hurt," she said, more to herself than to him. She gently, firmly, unwrapped the caked bandage. He cried out, a raw sound of agony, as she cleaned the gunshot wound with the last of her canteen water and packed the herbal poultice into it. He thrashed, but she held him, her small, wiry frame pinning him against the rock. "It's all right," she murmured, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. "It's all right. I've got you." For 3 days she did not leave his side. She made a splint for his leg from fallen branches and strips of her dress. She made a dozen agonizing trips to the seep, her feet screaming in protest, to haul water in the canteen. She fed him tiny sips. She kept the wound clean. She covered him with her own body for warmth when the high desert night sent the temperatures plummeting. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Wyatt woke to the smell of dust and herbs. His body felt like one giant throbbing bruise. He opened his eyes and saw not the rock face he remembered, but the frayed canvas of a makeshift shelter. He tried to sit up, and a bolt of white-hot pain shot from his leg. "Don't move. You'll break the splint." He turned his head. Joanne Miller was sitting cross-legged a few feet away, her face smudged with dirt, her hair matted. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear and sharp. "Joanne!" His voice was a dry croak. What happened?" "You were shot," she said simply. "Your leg is broken. You've had a fever." Shot. The memory came back in a sickening rush. The argument with Hobbs, riding into the canyon, the crack of a rifle from the ridge above, his horse rearing as the bullet tore through his shoulder, the fall, the snap of his bone, and then crawling. Just crawling. "Hobbs," he whispered, the name tasting like poison. It was Hobbs. Joanne's expression didn't change. She just nodded slowly. "I figured as much. He led the posse north, toward Badger's Pass. He said you were caught in the flood." Wyatt stared at her. He led them away? He left me for dead." "He would have too," she said, her voice quiet. "Your horse came back. I saw the track. I knew where you were headed." Wyatt finally looked past her, truly seeing her for the first time. Her dress was torn to ribbons, used as bandages and ties. Her hands were raw. And then he saw her feet. They were not feet. They were a ruined, bloody mess of raw flesh, swollen and caked in dried blood and dirt. The rags she had worn were in a tattered pile nearby. He felt his stomach clench. "My God," he whispered. "Joanne, your feet." She flinched and tried to tuck them under her torn skirt, a sudden wave of the old shame washing over her. "They're fine." The ground was rough. "You walked here?" he asked, his voice thick with a dawning, horrified awe. "Through the devil's throat? Barefoot?" She didn't answer. She just looked away, busying herself with resoaking a bandage. Wyatt reached out, his hand shaking, and gently touched her arm. She froze. "You saved my life," he said. "You walked through glass and rock, and you stayed with me. You saved my life." "You were dying," she said, as if it were the simplest explanation in the world. He saw it then. This wasn't the gambler's girl. This was the strongest, bravest woman he had ever met. She had faced down a canyon, infection, and certain death to save a man who had only ever offered her one kind word and a silver dollar. In that moment, he didn't care about the Circle B. He didn't care about his father's expectations or the town's judgment. "Joanne," he said, his voice gaining a new, iron strength. "When I get out of this canyon, when I'm on my feet again, I'm coming for you." She looked at him, confused. "Coming for me? Sir, you don't— Wyatt, call me Wyatt." He pushed himself up on one elbow, ignoring the pain. "I'm making you a promise. You saved me. I'm going to spend the rest of my life repaying you. I'm going to give you everything. A home, a new life, my name. I swear it, Joanne. I swear it on my life, the life you gave me." She stared at him, her eyes wide, unable to process the words. A promise, not of money, but of everything. Before she could answer, they heard a shout in the distance. "Wyatt! Hello!" It was Pete, the ranch hand who had sneered at her. "They're here," Joanne said, scrambling to her feet, wincing as she put weight on them. "The posse must have turned back." "Go," Wyatt said. "Signal them." But Joanne— "Not a word about Hobbs. Not to anyone but me. Do you understand? But he tried to kill you. And he'll try to kill you if he knows you are here," Wyatt said, his voice hard. "He knows I'm alive now. He'll be watching. Go, get them, and remember the promise." She nodded, then limped to the mouth of the box canyon, waving her arms. "Here. He's here. He's alive." The ranch hands found her. They saw Wyatt and they saw her feet. They didn't laugh. They stared in stunned, silent respect. They made a stretcher for Wyatt. Pete, the hand who had insulted her, gently lifted Joanne onto his own horse. "We got you, miss," he said, his voice full of shame. She was too exhausted to speak. As they rode, she looked back at Wyatt. He was watching her, his face grim but set with a new resolve. She held the small wooden bird in her pocket. She had saved him, and he had made her a promise. The return to the Circle B ranch was a blur. Joanne was taken to the doctor's office in town, where Dr. Miles, a kind man with sad eyes, spent 2 hours cleaning and bandaging her shredded feet. "You're lucky you didn't lose them, young lady," he muttered, shaking his head. "I've never seen such grit." Wyatt was taken to the main house, the sprawling adobe mansion that ruled the valley. Jeremiah Boone wept when he saw his son alive, a shocking, human display from a man most thought was carved from rock. Jeremiah sent a ranch hand to the doctor's office with a leather pouch for Joanne. It was heavy. She opened it. It was filled with gold coins. $100. More money than she had ever seen. "Mr. Boone sends his thanks," the hand said. "He says this should cover your troubles." Joanne pushed the bag back. "I don't want his money." "But miss, it's $100. "I did not do it for money," she said, her voice quiet. "Please, I just want to go home." The ranch hand, bewildered, took the money and left. Joanne, her feet wrapped in thick white bandages, was given a pair of old crutches, and she slowly, painfully, made her way back to her shack. For Wyatt, recovery was a prison. He was confined to his bed, his leg set, and his shoulder bandaged. His father was a constant, brooding presence. "A miracle," Jeremiah kept saying. "That girl, a miracle." "She saved my life, Father," Wyatt said from his bed, his voice still weak, "and I've paid her for it. Handsomely." Wyatt's head snapped up. "You paid her?" "Of course. $100. She'll be able to start a new life somewhere else. A good, clean break." "A clean break?" Wyatt tried to sit up. "Father, I made her a promise. I'm going to marry her." The room went utterly silent. Jeremiah Boone, who had been looking out the window, turned. His face was no longer that of a grateful father. It was the iron-fisted ruler of the Circle B. "You will do no such thing." "I gave my word. She is the finest woman I have ever known. She is a gambler's whelp!" Jeremiah roared, his voice shaking the room. "She is a barefoot vagrant from a shack. You think I built this empire, this name, to see you throw it away on dust? You are a boon. You will marry for this family. You will marry for land. I don't care about the land. I care about my honor. Your honor, Jeremiah sneered. Your honor is to your name. The alliance with the Porter Ranch is set. You will marry Genevieve Porter. Her father's land borders ours to the east. The marriage will make us the largest power in this territory. That is your duty. Genevieve Porter. Wyatt felt sick. She was a pale, haughty woman from back east, all lace and judgment. I won't do it, Wyatt said. You will, his father replied, his voice dropping to a cold, dangerous whisper. You are still weak. You will recover here, in this house. You will see no one. And if you attempt to see this Miller girl, I will personally see to it that she is run out of this territory. I will have Hobbs burn her shack to the ground. Do you understand me, boy? Her safety depends on your obedience. Wyatt sank back into the pillows, a cold dread washing over him. He was a prisoner. His father wasn't just threatening him, he was threatening her. He was trapped in a golden cage, and the one man he needed to expose, Landon Hobbs, was the very man his father was using as a threat. Hobbs, for his part, was playing the role of the loyal foreman perfectly. He'd admitted his terrible mistake in leading the posse north. I was just so sure, Mr. Boone, he'd said, his voice full of false regret. I'll never forgive myself. But when Hobbs visited Wyatt's sick room, his mask slipped. You were lucky, boss, Hobbs said, his voice low when they were alone. That canyon is a tricky place. A man could get lost forever. You shot me, Landon, Wyatt whispered, his voice shaking with rage. Hobbs smiled, a thin reptilian expression. The fever's still got you, Wyatt. You are raving. Lucky that girl found you. But she's unreliable. A tramp. Who would believe her word against mine? Your father certainly wouldn't. He needs me. Hobbs knew. He knew Jeremiah was using him as a threat. He was untouchable. Wyatt was trapped. He couldn't go to Joanne. He couldn't expose Hobbs. Any move he made would bring ruin down on the one person he was trying to protect. Weeks turned into a month. Joanne's feet slowly healed, but the scars remained, a network of pale, angry lines that would never fade. She'd managed to buy a new, sturdy pair of boots with the money she earned mending, but she still felt the phantom pain of the rocks. The town, for a time, had treated her differently. People nodded at her. The whispers were respectful. She was the girl who saved Wyatt Boone. But that tide, like all things in Dust Creek, began to turn. Wyatt didn't come. At first, she told herself he was still healing. He was weak. His father was keeping him. But then the wagons from the east arrived, laden with fine furniture, silks, and trunks. They weren't for the Boone Ranch. They were for the neighboring Porter estate. Then Genevieve Porter herself arrived. She rode through town in a polished carriage, her blonde hair piled high, her nose in the air. She was seen every day riding out to the Circle B. The whispers started again. Jeremiah Boone is finally marrying his son off. A proper match, the Porter fortune. Heard they're announcing the engagement at the governor's ball next month. What about that girl? The Miller girl? Pah, he probably paid her well. She's back in her shack, isn't she? Money's spent, I wager. Back to being trash. Joanne's newfound respect crumbled. The looks of admiration turned back to pity, and then to scorn. She was a fool. A girl who had walked through hell only to be tossed aside for a woman in silk. The promise, I'll give you everything. My name. It had been a fever dream, the delirious rambling of a dying man. Her heart, which had dared to hope for the first time in her life, hardened into a cold, heavy stone. One evening, as she was barring her door, a shadow fell across it. It was Landon Hobbs. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice slick. He didn't ask to come in. He simply pushed the door open and stepped inside, filling her small shack with his menacing presence. "What do you want?" Joanne asked, grabbing a fireplace poker. "Just a friendly chat." Hobbs looked around the clean but bare room, his lip curling. "You did a real service for the Boones, but I'm afraid your time in the sun is over. Get out of my home." "Wyatt's marrying Miss Porter," Hobbs said, ignoring her. He stepped closer. "He's forgotten all about you. He's moved on to better things. You're just trouble. A reminder of an unpleasantness." "He made me a promise," she whispered, hating the weakness in her own voice. Hobbs laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A promise? A man like Wyatt Boone? To a woman like you? You're nothing, and now you're a loose end. I think it's time you moved on. Somewhere far away. Arizona isn't healthy for you. Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you advice," Hobbs said. He idly picked up the small wooden bird from her mantelpiece, the one Wyatt had bought. "Wyatt doesn't want this. He doesn't want you." He accidentally let the bird slip, and it clattered to the floor. Then he brought his boot down, crushing the small carving into splinters. Joanne cried out, a sound of pure pain. Hobbs smiled. "It's just scrap wood. Now, you be gone by the end of the week, or I'll have to convince you." He turned and left. Joanne sank to her knees, staring at the broken pieces of the bird. It was true. He had crushed it. He had crushed her. Wyatt had abandoned her. The promise was a lie. She was alone, and she was in terrible danger. Wyatt was not idle. His golden cage had strong bars, but they did not stop his mind from working. For weeks, he played the part of the dutiful, recovering son. He was polite, if distant, during Genevieve Porter's awkward, orchestrated visits. He nodded along to his father's endless talk of land mergers and the upcoming governor's ball, where the engagement was to be announced. He ate the food brought to him, regained his strength, and practiced walking on his healing leg, first with a cane, then without, his new limp a permanent reminder of his accident. But at night, when the main house was quiet, Wyatt was a different man. He held secret, whispered conferences with Mr. Henderson, the aging, overlooked bookkeeper who had served the Circle B for 30 years and who despised Landon Hobbs with a quiet, clerical passion. "Look at the tally books for the last 6 months, Henderson," Wyatt had urged him during their first clandestine meeting. "Look at the sanguine claim," Henderson had finished, his eyes lighting up. "I've had my suspicions for months, Mr. Wyatt. He's been running a shadow herd, I'm sure of it, branding our strays with his own mark and driving them across the border through the devil's throat. He's been doctoring the books, claiming losses to wolves and rustlers that are just too high to be believed." "Prove it," Wyatt had said, his voice flat and hard. "Find the proof." And Henderson, empowered by the heir's trust, had done just that. He spent his nights poring over ledgers, cross-referencing shipping manifests and bank drafts. The night after Hobbs had visited Joanne and smashed her wooden bird, Henderson slipped into Wyatt's room. He was trembling, but his eyes were triumphant. He carried a thin, hidden ledger. "Here," Henderson whispered, opening it on Wyatt's desk. "A separate account, opened in Tucson. Deposits made 3 days after every loss," he reported. "And this? I found his real tally book, hidden in the grain feed. The numbers match the deposits, not our books. He's stolen over $20,000, Mr. Wyatt." Wyatt looked at the neat columns of figures. It was all there. The sanguine claim wasn't just a spring, it was the center of Hobbs's illicit empire. "He shot me," Wyatt said, the words tasting like rust. "I rode out to check the spring, and I would have seen his brands. He shot me to stop me." "What? What are you going to do?" Henderson asked, wiping his palms on his trousers. "I'm going to end this," Wyatt said. He picked up the ledger and walked, his limp pronounced, to his father's study. He didn't knock. Jeremiah Boone looked up from his desk, a look of pleasure on his face. "Son, you're walking well. Good. Genevieve and her father are expecting us for dinner." "I'm not going." Wyatt threw the forged ledger onto his father's desk. "And neither are you. Read it." Jeremiah's smile faded. He opened the book. His face went from confusion to disbelief, then to a dark, mottled red. This is fabrication. Henderson is a more loyal man than you've ever given him credit for," Wyatt said, his voice as cold as the canyon nights. "It's all there. The sanguine herd. The stolen money. He's been stealing from you for a year, Father, and he shot me. He left me in that canyon to die so I couldn't expose him." "No," Jeremiah whispered, sinking into his chair. "Landon, he's a good foreman. He made a mistake with the posse, but—" "Did he?" Wyatt leaned on the desk, his knuckles white. "Or did you let him? Did you know he was skimming? Maybe not how much. Maybe not about the shooting. But you knew he was useful, didn't you? You knew he was ambitious and cruel, and you used him to do your dirty work, to run off squatters, to intimidate our rivals, to threaten Joanne Miller." Jeremiah Boone's face went from red to a ghastly, papery white. He had no answer. The look of sick, dawning shame on his face was all the confirmation Wyatt needed. "You let a snake into your house," Wyatt seethed, "and you used him to terrorize the one person in this territory who has shown an ounce of honor. You valued your land over your son. You valued your name over your soul." At that exact, terrible moment, the study door burst open. It was Henderson, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Wyatt, Mr. Boone, I just heard one of the hands talking. In the stable. Hobbs, he just rode out. He was ranting. He said he was cleaning up a mess, once and for all. Mr. Wyatt, he took a full can of lamp oil." A cold, primal terror seized Wyatt, eclipsing his anger. "Cleaning up a mess." He looked at his father, his face a mask of accusation. "The mess is Joanne." Hobbs knew Wyatt was on to him. He was destroying the evidence, and to him, Joanne was the only living witness. Wyatt didn't wait for his father. He ran from the study, his limp forgotten. He grabbed his rifle from the rack above the door, his movements fluid and deadly. He sprinted to the stables, the shouts of his father and Henderson fading behind him. He bypassed his own horse, Tempest, who nickered at him. He needed more. He needed his father's fastest stallion, Ares, a beast of pure black muscle and fire. As he threw a bridle on the stallion, he moved to the next stall. With frantic, practiced hands, he saddled a second horse, a gentle, sturdy mare. On its back, he threw a brand-new, finely tooled side saddle, one he'd ordered from Tucson a week ago. From his own saddlebag, he grabbed a small, cloth-wrapped parcel and tucked it securely into the mare's bag. He had been planning to do this. He had been planning to go to her, to fulfill his promise. He just hadn't planned on doing it like this. He burst from the stable, leading the mare, and vaulted onto Ares. He dug his heels in, and the stallion exploded into a gallop. He rode like a madman, the mare thundering behind, a single desperate prayer on his lips. Let me be in time. Joanne was in her shack, and she was terrified. Hobbs's visit, his threat, his cold, dead eyes, they haunted her. She couldn't stay. He would be back. She was throwing her few possessions into a worn sack, her hands shaking. She had to run. Where, she didn't know. Just away. The door burst open, and she screamed. It was Hobbs. His face was a mask of rage, and in his hand he held the tin of lamp oil. The stench of it filled the tiny room, choking her. "I told you to leave," he snarled, his voice a low growl. He unstopped the can and began splashing the oil onto her floor, her cot, the walls. "Please, no, I'm leaving. I'm going," she pleaded, backing into the corner. "It's too late for that," Hobbs spat. "It's all over. Wyatt's been sniffing around, but it doesn't matter. You're the last loose end, girl. You should have just let him die in that canyon." He finished emptying the can and threw it aside, pulling his pistol. "He's mine. This ranch. All of it. It's all mine. His father is a weak old fool. And you're just dust." He raised the pistol. Joanne squeezed her eyes shut. "It's over, Landon." A voice roared from the night, a sound of pure thunder. Hobbs spun around. Wyatt Boone was standing in the doorway, framed by the moonlight, his rifle leveled at Hobbs's chest. He was no longer the polite son, the injured heir. He was a man forged in the crucible of the devil's throat, and his eyes were full of a cold, killing fury. "Wyatt," Hobbs breathed, his face contorting from rage to disbelief, and then back to a sneer. "You're a fast healer, boss. Come to watch?" "I've come to finish this." Hobbs raised his pistol, a desperate, wild move, but Wyatt was faster. He had been waiting. The rifle cracked, the sound deafening in the small shack, echoing like a promise kept. Hobbs cried out, a high, sharp sound, grabbing his shoulder. The pistol clattered to the oil-soaked floor. It wasn't a killing shot, it was a disabling one, a shot of cold, perfect justice. Hobbs collapsed, writhing and cursing. Seconds later, the yard was filled with riders. Jeremiah Boone, his face ashen, and a half-dozen ranch hands piled into the doorway, their guns drawn, stopping in stunned silence at the scene. Hobbs on the floor, Joanne weeping in the corner, and Wyatt standing over his enemy, his rifle still smoking. "He shot me, father," Wyatt said, his voice clear and ringing, not for his father, but for the men, for the record. "He confessed. He stole from you, and he tried to murder me. And now he was trying to murder her." Jeremiah looked at the whimpering Hobbs, then at his son, then at the terrified girl. The last of his pride broke. He nodded to the hands. "Take him, lock him in the cellar, wait for the marshal." The hands dragged the screaming, cursing foreman out. The room cleared. It was just Wyatt and Joanne, left alone, standing in the oil-soaked shack, the air thick with the smell of near death and betrayal. Joanne slid down the wall, her legs giving out, and she finally broke. Sobs tore from her, dry and racking. "I thought," she whispered, her voice raw, "I thought you'd forgotten. I thought you—" "With her." Wyatt holstered his rifle. He moved to her, his heart aching. He knelt, wincing as his bad leg bent. "I know," he said, his voice gentle. "I know what you thought. I know what he told you. I couldn't come. My father, he had me trapped. He was using you against me. If I came to you, he would have let Hobbs do this. He broke my bird," she whispered, her grief fixating on the one small act of cruelty she could understand. She pointed to the splinters on the floor. Wyatt looked at the broken wood. A muscle in his jaw clenched. He reached out, his hand hesitating, and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. Then he stood. "He can't break anything else," he said. He stepped outside for a moment and returned from the mare's saddlebag. He was holding the cloth-wrapped parcel. He knelt before her again and placed it in her lap. "I was bringing this to you anyway." She fumbled with the string, her fingers numb. She opened it. Inside was a pair of the finest, softest leather boots she had ever seen. They were beautiful, sturdy, and new. "It's not enough," Wyatt said, his voice thick. "After what you did, after what I let happen, it will never be enough. But it's a start." Wyatt stepped out of the oil-soaked shack, leaving Joanne alone with the first true gift she had ever received. He left the smell of kerosene and betrayal behind him and stepped into the cool, clean night air, his boots settling in the dust. The high moon was a silver coin, bathing the tense scene in a stark, pale light. The Circle B ranch hands stood in a silent, awkward cluster, their gazes shifting from the defeated Hobbs, who was now bound, to their boss, Jeremiah, and finally to Wyatt. Jeremiah Boone, standing apart, looked like a man carved from granite who had just been cracked down the middle. For the first time in Wyatt's life, his father looked old. His shoulders were slumped, the iron in his spine seemingly melted away, leaving only a brittle, bewildered old man. He was staring at the doorway of the shack, as if he could still see the ghost of the girl who had emerged from that canyon. She's quite a woman," Jeremiah said, his voice hollow, the words pulled from him. It was a concession, a statement of fact that cost his pride dearly. Wyatt didn't look at him. He kept his gaze on the door, waiting. "She's the woman I'm going to marry, Father." The words, spoken with the quiet finality of a judge's gavel, hung in the air. The ranch hands shuffled their feet. Jeremiah flinched as if struck. "Marry?" he hissed, taking a step forward. "Son, be reasonable. The Porter Alliance, the land, our name." "Our name?" Wyatt turned on him, his voice low but carrying a new, dangerous authority. "Our name is Mud. It's the name of a man who lets a thief and a murderer run his ranch. It's the name of a man who uses that murderer to threaten a penniless, innocent woman. That's the name you're so worried about." Jeremiah recoiled. I didn't know he—" "You knew enough," Wyatt cut him off. "You knew he was your shadow, doing the dirty work you were too respectable to do yourself, and in doing so, you nearly cost me my life." "She saved me." "She saved me," he repeated, jabbing a finger toward the shack. "Not the Boone name, not the Circle B, Joanne Miller, with nothing but her own 2 feet and a courage you and I can't even measure." He stepped closer to his father, their faces inches apart in the moonlight. "My honor isn't in land, Father. It's in my word. And I gave my word to her. I promised her my life, and I promised her my name. You will accept it, and you will honor her. Or, as of this night, you will lose your only son. The choice is yours." Wyatt didn't wait for an answer. He knew his father. The threat wasn't a gamble. It was a statement of his new reality. He turned his back on the old man, a final, definitive act of severing the son from the father, leaving only the man. Inside the shack, Joanne's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the boots. The leather was supple, smelling of tannin and wealth. It was a smell from another world. She sat on her cot, the same cot where she had shivered with cold and fear, and untied the rags from her scarred feet. She looked at the ruin of her skin, the pale, criss-crossed lines that would forever tell the story of the devil's throat. They were ugly, a mark of her poverty. Then she slowly, reverently, slid her foot into the first boot. It was like sliding her hand into a glove. It didn't pinch, it didn't chafe, it fit, as if it had been made for her. She pulled on the second. She stood up. The sturdy heel made her taller. The leather encased her, protected her. It was armor. For the first time in her life, she felt solid, rooted to the earth, but not trapped by it. She took a deep breath, smelling the oil Hobbs had splashed, a stark reminder of her peril. She had been given a gift, and she had been given a threat. But outside, she had heard the voices. She had heard Wyatt. She was no longer the gambler's girl, hiding. She was the woman who had walked that canyon. She straightened her torn, oil-stained skirt, pushed her matted hair back from her face, and walked out of the darkness of her shack into the bright, accusing moonlight. The moment she appeared, all conversation stopped. Wyatt's back had been to her, but he felt her presence, and he turned. His breath caught. The boots, the stance, the set of her jaw. This was not the half-starved creature he'd found by the spring. This was the woman who had kept him alive. He walked to her, ignoring his father, ignoring the watching men. He didn't say a word. He simply got down on one knee, in the dust and the mud, in front of his father and all the ranch hands. He, Wyatt Boone, heir to the Circle B, knelt before the girl from the shack. He gently took her hand. It was rough and scarred, but he held it as if it were the most precious thing in the territory. "Joanne Miller," he said, his voice clear and strong, ringing with absolute sincerity. "You walked barefoot through the dust to save me. I'm asking you to ride back with me, not as my savior, not as a pariah, but as my partner, as my wife." She stared at him, her eyes wide, the world tilting. She saw his father's shocked face over Wyatt's shoulder. She saw the stunned respect on the faces of the ranch hands, the same men who had sneered at her. "He broke your bird," Wyatt continued, his voice softer, for her alone. "I saw the pieces, but he couldn't break the promise. He broke your bird. Let me give you a new one." He reached into his own vest pocket. He pulled out the small, rough wooden bird she had carved, the one he'd bought with a silver dollar. It was smooth from being handled, its rough edges worn down. "But he smashed it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He smashed the one on your mantel," Wyatt said, his thumb stroking the wooden wing. This is the one I bought from you, the one I paid $1 for. I've carried it every day since. It reminded me that there was still goodness in this town. It reminded me of you." That was what broke her. Not the fear, not the pain, the kindness. Tears, hot and fast, fell from her eyes, washing away the dust on her cheeks. She was speechless. She couldn't find the words for the lifetime of pain that was dissolving, so she did the only thing she could. She nodded. Wyatt smiled, a brilliant, relieved smile that lit up his entire face. He stood, and without any hesitation, put his strong hands on her waist and lifted her easily onto the side saddle of the new mare. He then mounted his own stallion, Ares, a king claiming his queen. "Your shack is full of oil," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "You can't stay here. You'll stay at the ranch, in the main house, as my betrothed." He took the reins of her horse, and they turned to leave. They rode past Jeremiah Boone, who stood frozen, the master of a kingdom who had just lost all his power. Wyatt paused, looking down at his father. "She saved our name, father," he said, his voice void of anger, filled only with truth. "She saved it from a thief, and she saved it from its own pride. Don't you ever forget it." Jeremiah Boone looked at the girl on the horse. He saw her straight back, her scarred hands gripping the reins, and the unmistakable, unbreakable dignity that had been there all along. He saw the woman who had done what his money, his men, and his power could not. In a gesture that stunned every man watching, Jeremiah Boone, the iron ruler of the valley, slowly, respectfully, removed his hat. "Welcome to the family, Miss Miller." Wyatt nodded, a simple acknowledgement. He turned his horse, and they rode out, leaving the shack, the past, and the judgment behind. They rode into the ranch yard of the Circle B, not as the Baron's son and the gambler's girl, but as the man who had been saved and the woman who had saved him. He had ridden away a boy, arguing with a treacherous foreman. He rode back a man, with a horse, for the woman he loved, and a promise that was, at last, being kept. The town would talk. They would whisper for months. But this time they wouldn't be talking about the gambler's girl. They would be talking about Joanne Boone, the woman who had walked barefoot through hell and returned with a king. And so, Joanne Miller's walk ended not in the dust, but in the hall of the home she'd never dared to dream of. She proved that true strength isn't measured in land or gold, but in grit, honor, and the courage to walk into the fire for someone you love. The scars on her feet were a reminder, not of the pain, but of the promise. But what about Landon Hobbs? What happened to Jeremiah's broken pride? The real-life part of this story is that the consequences always find you. What did you think of Joanne's sacrifice? Do you think Wyatt did enough to repay her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories of hidden strength are everywhere, and if you want to hear more of them, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a story of hope, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We have a new story coming next week, and you won't want to miss it.